Turn with me over to Numbers chapter 1. You've been following along with the reading today. Today's reading is Numbers 1, chapters 1 and 2. And so I thought I'd spend a little bit of time going over what value that we could derive from this. You look at this and at first blush, you go, well, this is just a spreadsheet I'm reading, right? What value is there? But if you really get in depth and look in depth on there's some lessons to be learned. Uh, Chapter 1, we have a bunch of the tribes and their numbers. And the first thing I'd ask us to focus on is there's a census being conducted. And later on in the year, we're going to read about another census. And I ask you, when you get to that census, think back on this one and what's the difference. There's an interesting thing about the numbers themselves. If you spend some time on there, if you turn real quick, kind of preview the coming attractions, chapter 26 also has a census. And if you look at the numbers, you're going to see that there's not a lot of fluctuation except for one tribe, the tribe of Simeon. So I ask you, when you're reading this, spend some time looking at Simeon's number before and then after. And hopefully that will provide a little bit of a context to chapter 25, what happens there, particularly verse 14. And what do we learn from that? Well, we learn just how God looks at sin, and just God looks at holiness and how seriously he punishes it. So there's a lesson to be derived there. If you go through in chapter 2, we have kind of the Israelites are about to start off on a road trip, and they have it all set out of who is supposed to be next to whom, right? And I ask you, take a look at those names and see who's next to which tribe is sitting next to which tribe, and then go back into Genesis and look at the sons of Jacob and their respective mothers, and you'll see that if they're next to each other, most likely they're related, they're brothers or half brothers or something like that, that they are related to one another there. And when you think about that, you think about this is hundreds of years later after those events at the end of Genesis. And yet somehow, like, they still have those bonds that this must have been communicated. When they talk about the patriarchs, that this is our relationship with each other. That fact that that's still there hundreds of years later, and they're communicating that and sharing that, and they have those bonds. But even more important, and this is definitely the one lesson I think we can take from this, the most important lesson: where are they in relation to God? So as the Israelites are on the move or as they're encamped, the tabernacle where God resides is always in the center. So that their orientation to God and to each other is dictated by where that tabernacle is. And if we stop and think about that a second and look at that, there's a lesson to be learned there for us. Like, is God the center of our life? Whether we're in movement, we're in stasis, where is God in relation? And you can imagine these Israelites as they're moving across the desert. Spoiler alert, they mess up a lot, right? That even so, they have this physical reminder of God's presence right there, smack dab in the middle. There's nowhere in camp can you be without seeing that. And so the same thing with us. God is smack dab in our lives. We may choose to overlook it, to our shame, but he's still there. And so as we reflect on these things, I ask the question, is God centered in my life? Do I realize that he's centered in my life? Am I responding to it? And if not, we should do something about that. So I encourage you, if you're in that situation where maybe God hasn't been the center of your life and he should, or maybe you haven't even started that journey yet and you want to, please make that known as together we stand.